Uganda, and Tanzania. Then in session 2, we're going to share our international experience, and to lead us through that, we'll have Chris Williams and Kelly. So just to start us off, I'd wish to invite Mr. Waiswa. Yes, who is a Director of Environmental Monitoring Compliance, Nema, to give an opening remarks. Welcome, Mr. Waiswa.
Good morning, good afternoon, I'm Jambo Jamani. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Environmental Compliance Institute for organizing this meeting on strengthening regulatory frameworks for air quality management in East Africa. And I also want to thank Environmental Compliance Institute for keeping the network running despite the very many challenges. You know, the East African Network of Environmental Compliance and Enforcement was born in 2010. And along the way, it has had many challenges, but we want to really thank the Environmental Compliance and Environmental Compliance Institute for keeping the network alive. Colleagues, I just want to point out that as you are aware, air pollution is a rising problem in our region. And moreover, it knows no boundaries, okay? What happens in another country affects another country. Of course, the region is facing this big air pollution, of course, from the growing number of industries that we have, not have proper pollution abatement. We have motor vehicles which are poorly maintained, including the many motorcycles which are called boda. Here in Uganda, they are a total menace, okay? And during the lockdown last year, during the measurement, the air quality measurements done, so that actually in Kampala, the situation was very good because there were no motor vehicles. So motor vehicle emissions and border is really a big problem, contribute to air pollution. We also have poorly maintained landfills or garbage dump sites, which are also a source of air pollution, but also our unpaved roads, where a lot of particulate matter is generated. However, I should also point out that despite the above challenges, enforcement also the number of countries in enforcing issues related to air pollution. I'm aware that the member countries are at different stages of formulating regulations on air quality. In Uganda, we have draft regulations whose development has been supported by a number of partners, including the Norwegian Agency for International Development, United States Agency for International Development, UNEP, and of course, working closely also with environmental compliance and enforcement. Now, currently, we are mainly using the East African standards for air quality because those were gazetted, that's what we are using.
Sorry, attendees, we lost Mr. Waiswa. We can't get him. Let's hope he'll join. Maybe just to pick it up from there, and we might call him back to give his opening remarks. I would wish us to move to just the second session where we have state of air quality in Africa. We have different presenters. We have Gabriel from Burundi. We have Ms. Selela from Nema, Kenya. We have Jennifer from Nema, Uganda, and Mwakonda from VP's office, Tanzania. So at this time, I would wish to welcome Selela. Can you get us? Ms. Selela is from Nema, Kenya. She'll introduce herself and just take a short presentation. Welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Selela Okoth from the National Environment Management Authority, Kenya. I'll have a short presentation, so allow me to set it up and I'll switch off my video for reliable network. Godwin, are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, I'm able to see it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So, as I said, I'm in charge of air quality at NEMA, and I'll be just talking about implementation of our environmental air quality regulations, which are famously known as the Environmental Management and Coordination Act Air Quality Regulations of 2014. The naming, I don't know why it's not taking me to the next slide. Okay, good. Okay, fine. So the scope of the regulations, basically the foundation of these regulations is the environmental framework law, which we refer to as the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, in short EMCA, of 1999, having been amended in 2015. So as it stands today, we have like two separate frameworks on the environmental management, but I know they're working to merge them so that we talk about one EMCA, not two. And these are provisions, the provisions in EMCA that now give us the mandate to regulate, control air quality and manage it is found from section 78 to section 82 of the Environmental Management and Coordination Act. In terms of scope, the regulations cover stationary sources, which set requirements for emission licensing. And when we talk about this, basically what to expect from the regulated facilities, they submit stack emission reports, which are reviewed, and that forms the basis of whether to license or not license. And if you license with conditions, if you're not licensed, you raise issues that they have to address to. And normally what we end up with, we have what we call a full emission license, which means the operator or the regulated facility in that particular case has all the relevant parameters within the set standards. So if it is PM, it has to be the set standards, SOxS, NOxS, among others. But in case where we give you a provisional, that means certain parameters are beyond the set threshold. They're beyond the statutory standards that has been set in the air quality regulations. And before that is given, you must make a commitment to the authority by submitting what we call emission compliance plan, where you state whether it's in terms of technology, whether it's in terms of maintenance, depending on how your equipment is, your emitting equipment is. If it's something to do with firewood kind of fed boilers, then we want to understand issues of maintenance. But then there are those that definitely they have to give us certain pollution control technologies. For instance, if you're talking about a cement factory, for instance, and of course, then that sets the basis for air pollution control system, then that makes us know whether you are heading the right direction or not. So the emission compliance plan, if you don't commit to, if you commit to it, you must implement, because the next year when we are licensing you and you've not acted, then it would be easy to license such a facility, sorry. So this has been the case over the years since 2017. And we also have mobile sources, basically regulating internal combustion engines. And those are the parameters, the PM, the SOxS, NOxS, CO, hydrocarbons, and VOCs that are being regulated within these particular regulations. Now, it sets also methods of test. What is basically required here is that all the vehicles, all the trains, all the planes, ship, etc. must be given that particular kind of assessment. However, the strength as it stands today is more on motor vehicles and still weak on flights, on planes, weak on ships, and also the trains. And again, the requirement here is that if it's the motor vehicle, there's annual tests for the commercial ones, but for private vehicles, it's done after every 2 years. So in terms of status of implementation, what has happened is that we have been doing emission licensing since 2017. And to that extent, what we've been able to do, this, of course, you cannot do a physical check to assess and give a stack emission reports. So we've designated laboratories over the years to do stack emission measurement. They're also doing ambient air quality monitoring, and this normally we require ambient information, ambient air quality reports for facilities that are considered to be polluting, that their emissions and even fugitive emissions for that matter are going out of their boundaries, because probably sometimes you have complaints from the neighboring communities or even neighboring facilities. Then it's also a requirement that there is after 1 year of owning the first license, you need to get air dispersion modeling report submitted to us, because it also gives some kind of baseline to inform us. Again, in terms of just estimates here, not much data and research has been done on this. This is probably by experience having been there. Like we are talking about facilities brought to compliance estimated at 65%, but then facilities operating within the set regulatory limits is estimated at 30%. We have also been able to acquire a mobile air quality lab. It might not be having all the kind of equipment we want, but to an extent, it has been useful in assisting the authority do ambient air quality monitoring. So far, we've been doing this for certain hotspots, like in Mombasa and Nairobi, industrial areas, or where we know there is very high traffic. And of course, I want to say that mostly in terms of the particulate matter, the results have not been quite encouraging, which only means that there's something we need to do as a country. In terms of mobile sources, we have not rolled out, but we've initiated this process. We found it's not quite easy because it involves a lot of agencies. Like in our case, we have to work with relevant agencies like the National Transport and Safety Authority, because one, they own certain garages. They've been doing testing for safety for over the years. And we also need other agencies. So what we've been able to do, we have a task force in place, representatives from relevant agencies like Kenya Civil Aviation, Kenya Airports Authority, Kenya Railways Authority, the National Transport and Safety Authority. We have Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority. We are now bringing on board other agencies like Kenya Ports Authority, for instance. And what we expect is that with our set, the terms of reference that have been defined for this task force shall be finalized, and we are hopeful that by mid next year, we should have even gazetted some of maybe 2 or 4 the emission testing centers. We are also happy to probably say that already we have a draft designation criteria on this for designation of emission testing centers, and we are looking at how we engage with private garages, that have the capacity to do emission testing. It's a bit complicated, and government might not be able to afford the relevant equipment for doing emission testing. And I think the workforce also might not be available. So that is the position in terms of emission testing. And we have identified those who are interested, and we are working on engaging them. Sorry, can you mute anyone who is speaking? Please allow me to finish. Please mute so that I'm able to finish. So we have identified, there are people who have shown interest to work with Nema on this, private garages, and we are exploring this, and I think something will come out of this. As I finalize the last slide, it's taking a bit time, please. I'm just winding up. I think I need to get it to the next. Okay, thank you. We've also experienced challenges in terms of implementing the air quality regulations for these years. And probably in a quick summary, one is the issue of the technical capacity gaps in terms of reviewing of this stack emission report, specifically data interpretation. What we have now is basically what I can call a checklist, but in terms of understanding the calculations that we get from raw data and how actually it means in terms of emissions coming from each facility, we don't have that capacity yet. We are not also able to do appropriate air quality monitoring because of those technical hitches. We also have weaknesses in the regulations. There are quite a number, but I just picked on one where it talks about PM10 and not PM2.5, yet we all know that it's more dangerous to dealing with 2.5 in terms of public health than PM10. Again, we realize that some of the operations that are going on in the country have not been regulated, or rather they don't fall in the schedule where we have the control facilities, and then it becomes a challenge. A good case is where somebody is using waste oil and recovering it, and definitely it's emitting a lot of hydrocarbons, but putting it as a petroleum refinery, which is closest to it, you find it's a bit unfair because of the kind of equipment they own and what they are doing, because definitely they're not doing refinery per se. Inadequate stack emission analytical equipment. I think we've also been challenged with the labs in terms of integrity. Some of them are not honest. Some of them also give us very low quality reports. The bridge between policy and science has been a challenge to the regulators, policymakers, and general public. I think we attended a certain workshop here organized by Columbia University of the US, and we just realized that there's too much information within the country and that we as a policy and regulators don't seem to have information on, and yet they're critical when you want to do any viable decision regarding air quality management in the country. We've not mapped or zoned areas of pollution, so we are hanging there. So with that, I say thank you all. Asanteni.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Selena. Thank you. Maybe as you, for that wonderful presentation, maybe as you exit your screen sharing, at this time, I would wish to invite Jennifer from Uganda.
I had sent my presentation to Gary. I don't know whether it is possible to be shared so that I can present as he's showing the slides, because I'm unable to share the slides where I am. Is it possible?
Okay, let me just find out from Jerry. Hi, Jerry, would you do that, please?
So let me quickly get that. In the meantime, if you could catch Gabriel, that would be better.
Hi, Gabriel. Are you able to get me now clearly? Yes, Jerry, are you able to share Jennifer's presentation? Okay, so Jerry, you can go ahead and share Jennifer's presentation if you're ready.
All right. Thank you so much, Jerry, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Tesakwe, and I work with Nema, with the National Environment Management Authority of Uganda as the Senior Environment Inspector. And basically, my presentation is to give a highlight of how far we've gone with the progress we've made in the process of developing the air quality standards for Uganda. We've been working with Jerry. Yes. Yeah. And we've made some progress. Yeah, that's my presentation. Okay. So basically, the National Environment Management Authority has the mandate of developing standards and ensuring that the environment is protected. And in relation to air quality specifically, we are mandated to develop air quality standards. And this is a process we have been doing for quite some time. And we are in the final stages of this process. And basically my presentation is to give you a highlight of how far we've gone, because it has been a process that has been ongoing for quite some time. And it is almost getting to its final stage. So next slide, please. This is basically to talk about Nema Uganda, what it does, the mandate of monitoring, coordinating, supervising all activities in the environment field, and then advising government on and spearheading policies in regards to environment management. So we have a new act which was signed off by the president in 2019, and it gives us the mandate. Section 103 gives us the mandate to develop standards, specifically for air quality and other standards. But for purposes of this presentation, I just want to talk about issues to do with air quality. So we are mandated to do that kind of activity, and we do it together with our partner state, our partner institutions. We work hand in hand. We collaborate with other institutions like Kampala Capital City Authority, Makerere University. We have some non-government organizations on board, and the Ministry of Transport. Yeah, so this is a process we've been doing. And in process of developing these air quality standards, we did a lot of benchmarking. We benchmarked from the World Bank, we benchmarked from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency of the US. We benchmarked from EU, we benchmarked from South Africa. Then we came to our friends in Kenya, and then we also benchmarked from the East African air quality standards. So from that, we developed a matrix, and then we went through, we also had our background data, which we had generated. Like my director said at the beginning, he just gave a few remarks, but we generated data during the lockdown of COVID-19 during March 2020 up to July 2020. So during that time, we were able to know the state of air quality, especially for the capital city of Kampala. But again, we've been collecting data for the areas outside the capital city, because Uganda is not only in Kampala. Uganda is big. So we collected data of Kampala without any interference during the lockdown, and we were able to know the state of the air quality in Kampala. So all that we used all that information in the development of the air quality standards, and then also basing on the guidelines that are given by WHO. Then we came up with our standard, air quality standard. Next slide, please. Our air quality standard has the ambient air quality schedule. It has different schedules. One which speaks to the ambient, the slide before, not that one. That one, thank you. So we have a schedule which speaks to the regulations. Then we also we have a schedule that spells out the specifications, the standards, the numeric values for ambient air quality. And then under ambient air quality, we have the classical pollutants, and then we also have the hazardous air pollutants. All those fall under the category of ambient air quality. You know, ambient air quality receives all kinds of emissions. Both we have the hazardous and the non-hazardous, I may call them. So we categorized them into two, and then we divided that ambient air quality schedule into two. One which is for the classical air pollutants, and then part B, which is for the hazardous air pollutants. So we also have the source emissions. These are emissions which will be monitored from the source. And then we have the vehicle emission standards, which were developed based on the Euro 4. I think this cuts across the whole of East Africa. So, and then we also have the occupational health and safety standards. So basically, that's how our process has been in the development of the air quality standard. Next slide, please. Yeah, that is just an example of, this is how our ambient air quality standards look like. So I made the comparison with the WHO standards that were released on the 22nd of September 2020 to see how our air quality standard, the ambient air quality standard is faring in terms of the guidelines by the World Health Organization. And I think Our PM 2.5 is at 35 micrograms per meter cube. And the guideline provided this time around for WHO is 15. I think from 20, it is now more stringent to 15. So we generated this standard specifically to protect public health. So that's why it is that stringent. So you'll see that most of our values are very stringent when compared with other East African countries. And recently, when we were in this harmonization meeting for the East African air quality standards, these are some of the things we are trying to explain to our colleagues. Next slide, please. Yes, so we are still in the process of developing the standard, but we hopefully by December 2020, we'll have finished the development process, and the regulation will be signed off by the minister, and it will be ready for use. But we had a challenge of developing standards for the oil and gas sector, where we required more benchmarking, because this is a new sector in Uganda, and we needed to have information, better information to inform decisions, to inform the development of these standards. So we felt we were not prepared enough to come up with the standard for this very sector, the source emission standards for this very sector. So it is work in progress. This will be developed along as the sector is developed. Next slide, please. So implementation, what is it that we are going to do with our standard in place? Our standard requires lead agencies, municipalities, cities to constantly report on issues to do with air quality, to monitor the air quality within their jurisdiction, and then report to Nema about the air quality in their zones, and then also create for cases of where there is pollution. For example, like in Kampala, where where the pollution is high, we expect the Kampala Capital City Authority to set up pollution zones to zone areas, the polluted areas, zone them, then have programs in place on how they are going to ensure that those polluted areas meet the air quality, ambient air quality standards. So we, as opposed to the East African air quality standard, our standard here in Uganda is different. It does not categorize, it does not look at different categories. For example, like residences, then you have industrial parks, then you have controlled areas. No, for us, we said all areas must be protected, all human beings must be protected, and then air quality is mobile, it is dynamic. You cannot stop emissions from an industrial area to be blown towards the city center. So all those dynamics, we put them into consideration, and then we said, no, I think we need one standard for protection of public health, and then controls will be at the source. The source emissions is where the control will be to ensure that the air pollution is managed. Next slide, please. Future activities. Like I said, cities, municipalities, lead agencies like the Petroleum Authority, we expect them to report to NEMA. So how will they report? They are expected to set up monitoring stations, air quality monitoring stations. For example, like in Kampala City, Kampala Capital City Authority already has about 25 monitors, which are functional, and they are able to monitor the air quality of Kampala, and they are able to get real-time data for Kampala. So we expect that to be duplicated in the different cities and in the different municipalities. And then we expect them to report annually to the about the air quality within their jurisdictions to Nema. And then we would expect Nema, which is the overall institution in charge of environment, to report in the state of the state of the environment report, to report about air quality in the state of the environment report, which is a report that is issued, that comes out once every 2 years. So that's how we expect to receive information from our different partners, and the information we receive will be given out in the state of the environment report. Yeah, next slide, please. I think, that is my presentation, and that's where we are as a country. Thank you so much for listening. For God and my country.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We are glad for that wonderful presentation. Participants, you can use the Q&A function on your screens, Q&A functions, to be able to type in your questions as we have the presenters. So our next presenter is Afisha from Tanzania, Mwamkonda. Mr. Mwamkonda is from the Vice President's Office, Tanzania. So, Mr. Mwamkonda.
We were told to prepare a presentation for which will only include 3 slides, but I've seen some of my colleagues having quite lengthy slides. But anyway, that's no harm. I'll try to provide information which I think will be useful in terms of what we were required to do. So basically in Tanzania, like any other East Africa country, we also have air pollution laws. And before I talk about what we have, I'd just like to say that we have a national environmental policy of 1997, which recognizes air pollution as one of the main environmental challenges that we're facing in the country. And of course, that has also been echoed by our State of Environment report of 2018, which also reiterates the same. And the problem of air pollution in Tanzania manifests more in urban areas, and this is due to the concentration of many economic activities as compared to what you find within the rural areas. And according to the National State of Environment report, we have different sources of air pollution, but the major ones include air pollution from the transportation industry, from the industrial processes, from the mining industry, and as well from domestic biomass burning. So when it comes to how then are we tackling this air pollution problem, in 2004, we came up with what we call the Environment Management Act, that's Act number 4 of 2004. And this established the legal and institutional framework for dealing with environmental matters in the country. And the Act provided us with certain principles which are very important in dealing with air quality, the air pollution problem. One principle is that we have the Act recognizes the right to a safe, clean, and healthy environment. Then we have a principle of polluter pays principle, which requires any person who causes pollution to pay for that act. But it also includes the principle of what we call cleaner production techniques, which want companies to use technologies which will help them minimize the kind of emissions they have. So those are some few principles which have been provided in the Environment Management Act, which help us to deal with the air quality problem. But then what does the act say? Obviously, like any other act, it prohibits air pollution generally. And under it, the minister was required to establish regulations in order to give effect to air pollution matters. And the Environment Management Air Quality Regulations, Air Quality Standards Regulations, that's government notice of 2007, were promulgated and came into effect since 2008. Now, these regulations as they control, they regulate air quality standards in the country. But basically, there are two things which it does. First, it prohibits the emitting of different air pollutants. But secondly, it sets emitting standards for different facilities and pollutants as well. But apart from that, we also have the Standards Act of 2009, and this works hand in hand with the Environmental Management Act, because it is through the Standards Act where we have a committee on environment, and this committee is responsible for establishing different environmental quality standards, including the air quality standards that are provided under the regulations that we have. So in terms of enforcement of these quality standards, the major enforcement agency is the National Environmental Management Council, that is called NEMC. And NEMC identifies activities which require the grant of air pollution permits. So we have activities which don't qualify for that because the kind of pollution, air pollution they produce is quite less, but there are these which produce to a certain quantity whereby they'll be required to apply for air pollution permits. And also NEMC regulates now the issuing of these permits, and also can revoke permits if these facilities which are required to have permits don't meet the required standards, or they meet beyond the standards which they're supposed to. Also, NEMC is responsible for undertaking enforcement actions in terms of non-compliance, and they'll issue certain administrative orders, including compliance orders, stop orders, protection orders, and the like. And they also regularly monitor facilities to verify the extent to which these facilities are compliant with the regulation. And of course, it is also through NEMC where we encourage different air polluting facilities to adopt cleaner production techniques in order to minimize the kind of pollution, air pollution, the kind of emittents which they release to the environment, and which cause air pollution. But again, in enforcing the regulations, NEMC also collaborates with other agencies. I mentioned the Tanzania Bureau of Standards as one which sets these air quality standards, but we also have the Government Chemist Laboratory Authority, and this is the facility which does the testing of these facilities, and the reports are quite useful in trying to see whether these facilities are compliant or not. Then we have the Occupational Health, Safety and Healthy Authority, and this also has to do with the kind of, they also inspect facilities to see the ambient air qualities within the facilities, whether they are up to standards or not. Then we have the Land and Transport Regulatory Authority. Of course, this regulates vehicles which emit pollutants. So those are regulated by LATRA. Then we have the Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority, as we also heard one colleague talking about how the airline industry also needs to be regulated in terms of their emissions. And also we have the Energy Water Regulatory Authorities, and also government local authorities which will have a part to play in enforcing these regulations. So in a nutshell, colleagues, that's what we have here in Tanzania. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mamkonda. Thank you for the nice oral presentation. Participants, I'll just remind you that we'll use the Q&A function to pose our questions, and I think I'm trying to reach Gabriel from Burundi, but I think he has some technical hitch. So in the interest of time, we move to session 2 on sharing international experience and best practices. We have guests from UCPA. There's Chris Williams and Kali Ortega. So maybe at this time, I would invite Chris Williams to maybe say hi and pick it up from there. Chris, are you able to get me?
Yes, can you hear me? Good one.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris.
Okay, and let me
Welcome.
just thank you, and let me make sure it's Kelly Ortega.
Yes, can you see and hear me?
Yes, you can adjust your camera, Kelly.
Maybe up.
Hold on 1 second.
Is that any better?
I think we need to see your face. So just if you, and the camera seems to be up to your right. That makes sense.
It's my laptop camera, unfortunately.
Yes, yes.
It's not connecting. Let me try one more time and then I'll just go ahead and go off screen.
Is that connected at all?
Yeah,
No, it's still your other camera.
Okay.
Oh,
I'll go ahead and go off camera then so we can get started with the presentation. I'm sorry about that. It seems like I'm having challenges with my laptop and my external camera this morning.
okay. Thank you, Kelly. So maybe I'll just begin shortly to first thank everybody for allowing us the opportunity to listen to all the wonderful information that has been shared today. I think this has been a terrific exchange, and I have certainly learned a tremendous amount. And I would look forward to continuing opportunities to listen to this exchange. Can we please put on mute, folks? Thank you. So I just appreciate the opportunity to share something that is very important to me and very close to me. And I think that this type of forum, because the issue of climate change and air pollution is a global issue. And so having these opportunities that we can all get together and share our experiences so we can work together is extremely important. And so I work in the Office of Civil Enforcement, and I am a chemical engineer, and I'm an inspector. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kelly Ortega, so she can provide her introduction.
Thank you, Chris. And while I'm saying a few words, I'll let you share your screen and our presentation. So good morning, everyone. Thank you. I would like to echo Chris's comments and say thank you to the East African Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement for inviting us here today. And thank you to the earlier panelists. I too enjoyed your presentation. I am an attorney by training, and as Chris mentioned, we work together in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance at the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. You can go ahead to the next slide, Chris. So today we look forward to sharing with you some of our thoughts on best practices on effective enforcement specific to air quality regulatory programs. Next slide. Before we get into that discussion, I'd like to say a few words of background on our organization, the Environmental Protection Agency. Our agency was created in 1970 after some very visible environmental harms within our country. We had rivers catching on fire. We had very visible air pollution in cities and elsewhere. We had wildlife dying as a result of pesticide exposure. And so our legislative body, the United States Congress, decided to create our agency, the US EPA, to consolidate environmental laws and responsibilities in one place. Prior to that, each of our 50 states have the ability to create their own environmental standards. And what resulted was a competition between states to try to lower environmental standards to attract industry to their state. So together with the founding of our agency in 1970, our legislative branch also passed two important environmental statutes. One is the Clean Water Act and one is the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act is the statute that Chris and I work under. We, in our office at EPA, work to enforce violations of the Clean Air Act in order to protect human health and the environment. Next slide. This slide presents just an overview of our presentation. I'm going to provide a few comments on enforcement, how we do what we do, including how we monitor compliance and identify violations. And then Chris and I are going to walk through a case study, provide some of our actual experience with respect to a specific industry, the carbon black industry. And we're going to talk about how we inspected that industry and brought it into compliance. Next slide. Okay, so where do we start? We start long before it's time for enforcement. It's important to start with a clear rule, a clear law. The best enforcement team in the world with the best tools in the world can't overcome a poorly drafted regulation. And so it's important to get it right from day one, to write into the law provisions that incentivize compliance and that are clear and easy to understand by the regulated community. We have found through our work that strong electronic reporting and record keeping requirements are important. The more data that you can centralize electronically, the easier it is to access and the easier it is to identify non-compliance. If it is possible, as it sometimes is in our country, to make this data publicly accessible, then that is very helpful to us as an enforcement agency, because it increases the number of individuals who can see the data and who are responsible and who take it on themselves to hold a company accountable. And my final point on this slide relates to legal support. In our country, we have a system of courts, judicial courts. And so in order to bring a case, we have to have the legal support to pursue a violation. Next slide. We believe that consistent enforcement is a priority. And this is because it creates a culture of compliance within industry and creates an expectation within industry that if they don't comply, then our enforcement practitioners will be on the lookout and will come after them and they'll be held accountable. So this preserves a level playing field for the regulated community, and it helps us to protect human health and the environment. Next slide. We set priorities in our work, and we do this together with our state, local, and tribal partners. In the United States, as I mentioned, we have authority at the federal level. Each of our states retained some authority to enforce those federal laws. And some cities even have authority themselves, as do some of our First Nation tribal partners. So we'll often work with these different groups in order to pursue a violating company. We try to target the most serious hazards, and we try to target the most persistent patterns of violation. And that can be with a particular company or within a particular industry. And our touchstone, our constant focus is how do we get the most environmental and human health benefit from our action? We have too many violations to possibly pursue, unfortunately. Our resources are limited, both our personnel and in terms of funding. And so we have to make choices. Next slide. How do we identify violations? Well, we have a variety of ways in which we do that. Often we'll receive tips or complaints from the public, and we'll pursue those tips or complaints. The regulated community has an opportunity to self-audit in the United States, and we have policies in place to encourage that self-auditing. We encourage companies to self-disclose violations and work to correct them. We do work off-site in our office to try to identify compliance and violators. We have a provision under our Clean Air Act that allows us to send out information requests, which are basically letters that request from a company all sorts of data. It can be related to continuous emission monitors if they have them in place. It can be related to stack testing. The authority is very broad, and it is incredibly valuable because what we get in response to that is fulsome data. If a company does not reply to our information request, the Clean Air Act allows us to actually pursue the company for a violation of its failure to respond. So it's a very valuable tool in the work that we do. And our final technique in identifying violations is through on-site compliance monitoring. In other words, inspections. And Chris will be talking more about inspections in a few minutes. Next slide. So I'm going to transition now to walking through our case study, finding violations of the Clean Air Act through inspections. And again, we're looking at the carbon black industry. Next slide. What is carbon black? It is a fine particulate that is used in tires, plastic, rubber, ink, and other products. It's basically soot. So it is produced by burning a high sulfur oil in low oxygen. That process changes the oil into a soot product, the carbon black, which is collected in a bag house, which is exactly what it sounds like, a big bag, and then is bundled off for use in the products in the first bullet. Next slide. In the United States, we have 5 companies operating 15 facilities producing carbon black. The pollutants that are emitted as part of the production process are sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, particulate matter, and hazardous air pollutants. So before we focused on the industry, it was emitting approximately 90,000 tons per year of sulfur dioxide and approximately 13,000 tons per year of nitrous oxide. After we brought our enforcement cases, pollution is going dramatically down. And by the time controls are installed and they are in process of being installed, we expect sulfur dioxide pollution to be approximately 20,000 tons per year and nitrous oxide pollution to be approximately 3,500 tons per year. Next slide. We are seeing these big reductions in pollution levels because prior to our enforcement cases, no plant in the United States had controls for sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide. They did not have controls such as flue gas desulfurization, sometimes known as scrubbers, or selective catalytic converters, known as SCRs. These technologies were commonly in place in other countries, including China, South Korea, and Brazil. The United States, however, was behind. And this is in spite of the fact that these technologies are commonly used in other industries in the United States. So we knew it was technically feasible for carbon black plants to use these controls. Nonetheless, they did not, nor did they have in place continuous emission monitors for monitoring the pollution from their plant. Next slide. So the purpose of this slide is to show you what a carbon black plant looks like from above. And you can pretty easily identify it. It is in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. It is that ugly black smudge. Yes. Next slide. How did we find these cases? Well, remember earlier I said we are often led to a case through a tip or a complaint from the community. And that is what happened in the carbon black cases. We received complaints from communities near several of these plants. You saw the black smudge on the preceding page. That is particulate matter that got loose from a bag house. And that particulate matter getting loose from a bag house filters out into the surrounding community. And so we received complaints. We conducted inspections at 2 facilities and found violations. Then we used our information request authority and sent information requests to all of the companies in the industry and found widespread non-compliance. As a result, we issued notices of violation. Next slide, please. The US carbon black industry is not a wealthy industry. Its financial situation is actually very poor. Carbon black is a low value product. Profit is pennies on the dollar, which is not much. Conversely, the controls required for compliance are very expensive, approximately 150 million per facility, and they would eliminate most of the profit from these companies. So we had to keep in mind the strategic situation with these companies. We had to keep in mind their relationship with each other. And we made the decision that what we needed to do was try to control the entire industry on the same schedule in the same manner so that each company would have to face the cost of our action at the same time. And we would maintain a level playing field. Next slide. And here is where I will hand the presentation over to Chris. Chris, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. At this point, I was tasked with helping to generate data that would support a case that demonstrates that the facility or these facilities are in fact emitting out of compliance with their local permit or license, I think is how other countries have framed it, and regulations. So one of the challenges that we currently had at this industry was there was a lack of continuous emission monitoring data. Many facilities of this size that emit these pollutants are required to continuously monitor their emissions through specific technology that is measuring at the stacks of the major emission points. The emission data that we did have came from old stack tests. These stack tests were historical, and so they weren't necessarily providing us the information we needed. Regulations change over time, and we needed to demonstrate that the currently, excuse me, can we mute? We need to demonstrate that we needed to demonstrate, sorry, can you mute your line? Thank you. Please mute. So we needed to demonstrate that the facilities were continuing to emit. And so we needed better data to support our case. So I went with a colleague of mine to one of the carbon black facilities that was particularly challenging for us to build our case. And when I went there, we found leaking pipes that were open, combustion technology that wasn't working, and very poor conditions, a lot of black soot, which was the carbon black product that was being blowing around and not being contained. On this inspection, we used what I find to be one of the most important tools in the work that I do, advanced technology that helped me to detect emissions and document the evidence for me to build a case that demonstrated that these facilities were not in compliance with the regulations. Interestingly enough, when I first arrived, and I went a couple times to this facility, the plant manager took me on a route, but I believe was specific in where he took me to only show areas of the plant that were well maintained. Luckily, I had tools at my disposal that were able to measure, handheld tools that were able to measure the ambient concentrations, and I was getting very high readings that seemed to be emanating from somewhere else in the plant. And so I was able to drive, in a sense, the inspection by utilizing these tools and asking the plant manager to look at places that he normally would not, I believe, have taken me. After seeing a little bit of the issues while being there the first time, I believed a second inspection, a second site visit was required. And so I, again, after having done some research and gathering the proper tools, went back to the facility and inspected every inch. We climbed every staircase, walked on every piece of equipment that we possibly could to make observations and take measurements of what was being emitted. So again, just to reframe, this is what the carbon black facility looked like. And interestingly enough, this facility had another carbon black facility that was across the street. And so you can see there's a street that runs through, and there are two facilities that produce carbon black. Can we please put on mute? Thank you. The investigative process, and so I do find that a lot of what I do, I would say, is similar to detective work. Generally, when I'm looking at an industry, I have to do background research. And then I identify the areas of concern related to air pollution. This is all before I set foot at the facility. I develop a strategy so I can measure those emissions to provide good data so Kelly and her team can engage the attorneys in the legal process to demonstrate that the facility is not in compliance with regulations. I then perform an on-site inspection to gather that data, and I evaluate the information that I obtain, but also request information specific from the company of their historical operations to help build the case that they are not in compliance with regulations. And all of this I review against their requirements. The tools that I use are sight, sound, and smell. Extremely important to use your eyes, to use your nose, and to use your ears. This is the bedrock of the inspection of an inspector's tool set. The other tools that I have are handheld devices. We have photoionization detectors, which are used to measure volatile organic compounds. We have 4 gas meters, which can monitor for a wide array, including carbon monoxide, H2S, hydrogen sulfide, LEL, lower explosive limit. And I also use an infrared camera, which detects hydrocarbon emissions allows you the ability to record. It's a very, very useful tool. I do a lot of work in the oil and gas industry, and it helps me to establish the location of leaks. We also have canister samples. We can actually sample the air or a plume that might potentially have pollutants in it and send it to a lab to demonstrate what pollutants are being emitted from that plume. And then as we move up to more advanced technologies, we have spectrometers. One is called the dial and the other is DUVAS. And these are expensive pieces of equipment that we are able to contract from contract from private industry to utilize to measure ambient air concentrations to demonstrate whether the emissions from a facility are above those that would have required action. So just shows an illustration. We're talking about over here on the left, this is a PID, a photoionization detector. Down here is a optical gas imaging camera. Again, it allows me to see hydrocarbon emissions. This here is a handheld device that's able to measure different gas constituents. And over here is a spectrometer that we have attached to a vehicle that allows us to drive around a facility to measure ambient air quality concentrations of many of the criteria pollutants. So when I went out to the facility, we gathered evidence, video evidence. Again, I was using sight, sound, and smell, and I documented what I saw. So this, as Kelly had explained, the gas that's utilized or the fuel that's utilized in the facility to produce carbon black has a lot of sulfur. And you can start to see here the buildup, this yellow buildup of sulfur, which demonstrates to me that they're emitting from points that they are not allowed to emit from. There are points established at each facility for which they're allowed to emit from, and there's generally a limit to how much they emit. But up until that point, the facility should be enclosed, and or at least the piping or the process equipment should be enclosed so that the pollutants do not get emitted from atmosphere. And so this is a video to just illustrate the egregiousness of how poorly maintained the facility was. Oh, excuse me, let me go back. So you can see here, this is documented evidence that demonstrates that the gas is not going to the emission point and being emitted prior to that point. And you can see a handheld device where I'm taking, or my colleague is taking measurements of what is being emitted to establish the concentration of criteria pollutants in that gas. This is another illustration that you can see. Again, you can see it with your eyes of a pipe that was had corroded through and was emitting pollutants. And this here, you can see, is a stack for a thermal combustion unit that destroys, or should destroy if designed and operated properly, volatile organics that remain in the gas prior to being emitted. You can see that the stack itself looks poorly maintained just from a visual observation, that there's corrosion and may not be operating properly. Utilizing optical gas imaging, as I described, I'm able to detect emissions. And this I will show you is a video, but the video is in the infrared spectra. And as a result, it looks a little different from the visual spectra. But from here, you can see optically the hydrocarbon emissions that are unburnt hydrocarbons exiting from the stack. And so if you were getting good combustion, you would not expect to see, using optical gas imaging, this amount of hydrocarbon remaining from the stack that's exiting from the stack. And so this helps to establish that there is something wrong, that there is not complete combustion occurring. a very powerful tool. While we were at the facility, and like I described, they had a lot of problems when we were there, but specifically a condition of operation occurred where they overpressurized their bag house. The bag house, as Kelly described, is utilized to capture the carbon black from the combustion stream. And in this case, while we were there, they overpressurized the bag house and they blew a hole in the bag house. And as a result, heavily laden PM, SO2, and NOx gases and VOC, excuse me, were being emitted, and we were able to capture this on camera. And this is this very black smoke that's just exiting the facility. So luckily for me, at this time, we had that mobile monitoring system. And we were driving a vehicle around, and during approximately, and timing is very important when I'm doing inspections, we were able to measure SO2 emissions that had occurred as the result of that bag house emission event. And you can see here, we have 75 parts per billion. I think that would also translate to micrograms per meter cubed as the standard. And over that time period, the facility was emitting way over that standard. After going out to that inspection and demonstrating to Sid Richardson the evidence that we had gathered, Sid Richardson came to us, which is the company, and they entered into settlement discussions in a quick, within 2 weeks of that last inspection. In 2 months, they had negotiated a settlement, and the company was in process of installing controls to mitigate and prevent emissions of the criteria pollutants. Recently, the company came to DC and made a special visit to thank us for our professionalism and helping to find a resolution that allowed the company to keep operating its facilities. So with that, I don't know, Kelly, if you had anything you wanted to add before I turn it back over to our moderator.
No, thank you very much, Chris.
So that is all we have for today. Thank you for listening, and I will turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. And thank you, Otege and Chris, for the presentation. That was fantastic. And participants, you can actually attest that equipment, proper equipment is key to compliance, because it will give you data that will enable you to do the monitoring and also enforce. So at this point, we'll move to the Q&A session. We've tried to get Gabriel from Burundi, but apparently we can't get him to speak. I think there's a problem with the microphone. Gabriel, would you give it a try before we go to Q&A session? Gabriel, able to hear me? Okay, it's me this same problem. So we are moving to the Q&A session, and you'll be allowed to type your question in the chat, and also you can raise your hand so that I unmute you if you have a question. So Chris, it's on hand, sorry. So at this point, their questions have already been filled for the other presenters. And as we go on to answer these questions, I'll request that for those who want to ask oral questions, please just raise your hand. So on the Q&A, we have a question from a participant, and I think this is directed to Nema Kenya, if I'm not wrong. And this is the question. I hope, Selena, you can get me. So
Yes, I can hear you.
so there's a question concerning the emission from vehicles. Have you set standard for the imported cars from outside? As we all know that cars are coming from countries like Japan, etc. So is there any standard before importing this car? I think this is the question. So basically the participant is asking about the standards. Are they in place? So Selena, are we able to respond to that?
Yeah, I can respond to that, Godwin. Thank you very much for the previous presenters. I truly appreciate there's a lot of information. And just in response to the question, what we are working on, we have already identified those parameters in the air quality regulations, and we are guided by standards. Our understanding is that, and what actually we shall do is that imported vehicles will be subjected to emission testing. However, we also note that there are already pre-existing provisions on the years upon which the vehicle should have been, the date of manufacture determines when a vehicle can be shipped in Kenya. So that is one of the already controls that the government has been having over the years. And then in addition to that, we also know that some of these vehicles come also from stringent countries with very stringent standards, unless some illegality was committed by the importer who probably did not follow the requirements. But with strong enforcement at the point of entry, vehicles that do not meet standard ideally should not enter Kenya. The expectation, as said, it doesn't matter whether it's a locally assembled vehicle, or it's an imported vehicle. The rule applies, the law applies to all, and whatever we call a motor vehicle, they'll be subjected to emission testing, as I already stated earlier. So there is none that is excluded from this list. Thank you.
Godwin, sorry, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Nevit, I've allowed you to talk. Kindly, you can raise your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to, my question is towards our US EPA presenter. Like in India, we have got very complicated system of compliance. So when I hear the Chris presentation, I could see they negotiated for 2 months and the company showed interest to install some of the pollution control equipment. So my question is how this negotiation goes. What is the process of this negotiation?
Wow, Kelly, I think that might be a question that's best suited for you.
Sure, I'm
That's a
happy
great
to
question.
start. I'm happy to start. Let me say the negotiation took a long time. It took years. We started and met a lot of resistance from the company. We, as I mentioned, issued our information request and we presented that evidence to the company, and for about a year and a half made no progress. Once we sent Chris into the field to do his inspections, then the company changed its course of action. It became concerned because it knew that Chris had laid eyes on the violation. They knew that Chris was out there with the monitors he discussed, taking measurements, and they became serious about our action. They also knew, as a result of the years of negotiation, that we were patient and we weren't going to drop the issue. They could also see us pursuing the other companies within the industry. So all of those factors added up together to make us successful in the long run. But it did take a very long time. And in part, that is because the cost of the controls was so high. So each of the companies needed to feel confident that we were going after each of the other companies. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Kelly.
I would just add, Kelly, and I think it's been said many times, but the importance of having good information that supports a case of non-compliance provides, I think, Kelly, her tool, the tools for her to convince a company that it would be much better to settle, to seek controls outside of having to go into court and go through a process, a judicial process that with long litigation. That could be quite expensive for a company.
Thank you, Chris, for that. The next question is directed to Jennifer. So Jennifer, can you hear me? Jennifer? You are muted, Jennifer. Okay, yeah. This question is directed to you, Jennifer. How frequent are facilities?
Yes.
Yeah. How frequent?
I beg your pardon, please.
Yes, so it's a question concerning Uganda.
Yes.
Okay, so how frequent are facilities required to submit source emission monitoring reports in Uganda? And then what challenges have you experienced while enforcing the requirements?
For source emissions, the revision has been put to twice a year, but previously it has been, they were expected to submit reports on their source and effluents, wastewater, and their emissions every quarter. But it has been revised because of because of issues to do with reporting, when facilities are required to undertake reporting somehow, like we've been having issues, not every facility reporting on time. So we said, let's revise, make it a longer time in order for them to be able to put their data together and then submit. But previously it has been quarterly. But in the new law, it is twice every year. And then at the end of the year, they will be expected to do a compliance audit and then again submit a yearly report on the emissions, both for on the air quality and the wastewater, if it is a wastewater generating facility. I submit.
Thank you very much. That was a question from Jilani. Jilani, are you able to talk? I've allowed you to talk. If you have a follow-up on that. Okay, so the next question is from Eric. Eric is, and this is directed to Nema Kenya. So Eric is asking, what procedures does Nema have to verify when they're undertaking environmental compliance audit? What has been done by experts? I think that was asking. Whenever you want to look at the audits that have been done by experts, what tools do you have, or how do you verify how they have undertaken the audit, especially in regards to air quality? Serela, is that question clear?
Yes, it is. I think
Okay.
I think the focus is on air quality, probably just verification aspect of it.
Yes.
As I said earlier in my presentation, we have a mobile air quality lab. It might not have certain necessary equipment like what Chris has just presented a short while ago. We are able to monitor certain parameters, including VOCs, in using this mobile equipment. What we've had in the past, we've made some attempts, I think, fairly good, noting that we also appreciate the challenges that we have, where we have had cases of probably reported cases where there is an alleged polluter. And we've used this equipment to do some analysis. And what we also do in certain cases where we are in doubt or we need a further response, we've been able to engage the services of the designated laboratories to undertake that kind of assessment for us. I also want to appreciate that I have my colleague Jilani. So in the event that he might be interested in adding any voice to it, if you could allow him, Godwin, thank you. I hope that answers Eric who asked the question.
Okay, Selena, just a follow-up to that. There's a question from Aisha, and the question is, what about the pollution that comes from the factories? Most people have been complaining of emission from factories, especially in urban setup. How to go about this?
Just allow me to use the slide from Chris, because we also just use what we call the senses, the smell, the sight, and the sound. That is usually our first starting point. Now, when we, of course, that is never conclusive on matters air quality. The other requirement then that comes to be is that if we get suspicious that there's something not right, we go and do our own assessment. As I said, we do some measurements, and where we are unable to do with what we have, we now engage, we outsource for services. And this has been going on for certain facilities. A good case here that has been running sometimes on the media, we've had a lot of parliamentary engagements, is the London Distillers Limited. That's one good example. And I also wanted to say that as a regulator, we have powers to request for additional measurements from a facility. We can ask for a stack emission report from this particular facility within a given and a feasible timeline. And we also ask for what we call ambient air quality monitoring report from these facilities, because it gives a lot of information that can guide us to know whether it is that specific facility or we are targeting the wrong person. So those are the approaches we have. They might not be as adequate as what US EPA has presented today, which is very impressive, but at least we've made some attempts. And I think so far we can probably say that we have been able to nail down a few of these facilities and probably undertake certain action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selena. So this is directed to, the next question is directed to Kelly and Chris. And this is the question. During inspection and monitoring, does US EPA close or shut down a facility when they detect a violation? Or the facility continues its operation until such a time the issue is concluded, either via litigation or facility complying? Chris, did you get that? Or?
Thank you. Thank you for the
Yes,
question.
Yes.
It is a very good question. Usually, the facility will continue to operate while we pursue our case. We do have under the Clean Air Act a provision that is called imminent and substantial danger authority. And it is a provision that theoretically allows us to shut a facility down immediately. It is very rare that we use this authority, but it is available if we discover an acute threat to human health or the environment. Usually what we discover are violations that have more of a chronic effect. So the impact of the pollutants would build up over time, and we don't need to take immediate action to shut the facility down. But we do have that other authority in the event that it is necessary. And it has been used in the past, just very, very rarely. Chris, did you want to add anything?
No, but I think as an agency, we try to come to a resolution that does not require the company to shut down. That's very important for us to have discussions and to require the company to do things, and it would be their decision to shut down. But as Kelly has suggested, we do have the authority theoretically to do it when we can establish an imminent threat to human health and the environment.
I'll make one final point, which is this. Sometimes the fact that EPA goes out and inspects a facility and finds a problem is enough for the company to decide to shut down the problematic source or unit. So if Chris comes out and he sees a plume of whatever is the violative material, sometimes the company will decide of its own accord to shut that unit down for further investigation. So that's very helpful as well. We don't order the action, but the fact that we conducted an inspection has a deterrent effect.
Thank you very much, Katie and Chris. The next question is directed to Tanzania. And the question is, how well has the polluter pay principle worked in Tanzania? How well has polluter pay principle worked in Tanzania? And I guess this is in regard to air quality management. Okay, so as we wait for Safisa to respond to that, Nizeye Boniface has raised his hand. So I'm going to allow him. Nizeye Boniface, your hand is up. Okay. Okay. So back to Tanzania.
Yeah, indeed, the polluter pays principle has been quite effective in combating air pollution in the country. And as you heard from the colleagues in the United States, we usually don't go out first to penalize these facilities, but usually try to help them comply. So when we find them infringing, we usually issue them with compliance orders. And compliance orders usually stipulate a period of time in which they ought to rectify the anomalies which are found in that facility in terms as far as complying with the air quality standards regulation is concerned. Now, if a facility fails to meet the requirements of the compliance order in the stipulated time, which will be stated in an order, then usually there are two options available. One is to take this facility to court, or the other option would be to compound that offense. And in most cases, most of these facilities will opt for that offense to be compounded rather than going through that whole long process of going to court. And for that matter, then they'll pay a certain amount of money and they'll be released from that charge. So that's part of how the polluter pays principle has been applied in this situation. And it has worked quite very well for us in Tanzania. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you very much, Safisa. Thank you for that. And participants, I think this far we've met the two objectives. One is to share our international experience from our colleagues from UCPA, and also to have the local perspective and just look at the dimension concerning air quality management in East Africa. I'd want to hand over the program to Jerry to do the closing remarks as we come to a close. Jerry, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, Godwin, and thank you very much for running us through the agenda today. Before I close with my remarks, I just have one little question which I hope Kelly and Chris can address before we proceed. So it's basically in terms of enforcement priorities, because for regulatory agencies here, and I guess it's the world over, resources, whether it's human resource or financial or technology, it's always limited. And for air pollution, for that matter, how then do you prioritize your inspections and other enforcement actions in view of the limited resources? If you can just respond to that, I think that should bring us to the end of this. Thank you.
Thank you. It is difficult. There is always more work that we want to do that we cannot do. We have a division of labor within our agency. We have a majority of what are called career civil servants. But every 4 years, we have new political management that comes in. So often our priorities will change based upon who is in the White House, which party, and what are their priorities. And so right now, we have President Biden in the White House, and he has indicated that for the next 4 years at least, 2 of our priorities shall be environmental justice, which is a focus on communities that have historically been overburdened by pollution, and on climate change. So those will be 2 areas of focus for the next 4 years. But within those areas, it is often quite difficult to make decisions. As I mentioned earlier, we'll try to work with our state and local partners, our First Nations partners, to get a sense of their priorities and figure out what is best for everyone as far as a target. But we always want to do more.
Thank you, Kelly. And I would just like to add that when it comes to the inspection priorities, we try to focus on the largest emitters. And that can be from their calculations that they're submitted annually for purposes of inventory, but also from our technical understanding of how processes are operated and what products, raw materials go into those processes. I will also say that in enforcement, we believe that making good examples for folks to industry to see that, EPA is out there and they are bringing cases and they are offending or violators are required to pay very large fines and pay expensive legal fees and put on controls, helps to have a deterrent effect. So then we do not need to go visit every facility, that there is an understanding that if they're out of compliance, it's going to be costly. And so it's best to put in the effort up front before EPA finds out that they're not in compliance, because the back end expense could be a tremendous amount.
Thank you very much, Chris and Kelly, for those responses. So at this point in time, we are coming to the end of our session for today. On behalf of the Environmental Compliance Institute, ECI, which is continuing to provide the Secretariat to the East African Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement, I would really like to thank all of you for making it today. This is just one of the series of many other webinars that we've planned towards the end of the year, and we'll continue with this kind of work through the coming years. I must say special thanks to our colleagues, Chris and Kelly from the US EPA. The East Africa Network has had a very close relationship with EPA over the past decade, spanning back to the year 2010 when the network was set up. And we continue to have this relationship through the International Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement, where we participate. And we hope to continue with this kind of relationships. And thanks so much, for making time to share best practices. It's always a struggle for us in this part of the world, and it's inspiring to learn from you. I would like to thank colleagues from East Africa, Waiswa, Director at Nema Uganda. Thank you very much for making it, and your team led by Jennifer and everybody else who joined from Uganda. Gabriel from Burundi, thank you very much for making it despite the technical hitch. You stayed throughout, and we hope that in the next series we can have you share the bits from Burundi. Isakwisa and colleagues from Tanzania, thank you very much. We've worked the INIS work with you guys for almost more than a decade now, and we are glad that you continue working the work with us. Colleagues from other countries who are able to join. I know Tibebu of C40 was able to join from Addis Ababa. Thanks for that. Nivit of Center for Environment, for Science and Environment, India, making it at very odd hours, but we really appreciate. And from whichever part of the world that you join, just know that that's all appreciated. To our panelists, all of you who made very inspiring presentations, thanks for responding positively to our call, and we hope to continue collaborating with you even as we move forward. So with those many remarks, I would like to bring the meeting to a close. Wish you a great day ahead for colleagues in the US who are just beginning their day. And for the rest of us in East Africa, have a great evening, and see you again soon. We shall continue this conversation going forward. And should you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at ECI, and we shall always try to get experts from around and other parts to help answer some of your questions. So thank you very much, and have a great evening ahead. Goodbye.